Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Trevor.
Karl.
I'm Ari.
And I'm Josh. And Karl, it's great to have you back on the panel for a second season.
Great to be here.
We always enjoy having you on here because you're so outgoing and always have something to say.
I guess that's good. That's a good thing, right? Okay.
Yes,
Right,
it's a good thing. And today we're going to be going over a short story that was adapted from an episode of the Twilight Zone.
I did not realize you got a copy of that.
Yep, I got the...
I have the paperback copy from the original publication date. I just didn't bring it with me.
I got the hardcover version. The particular story we're going to be going over is...
Well, wait, why don't you tell them what it is first?
You
didn't tell them what it was.
Oh, my book?
Yeah.
This book is The Twilight Zone, the original stories, 30 of the most famous, weird, and shocking stories ever published, edited by Martin Harry Greenberg, Richard Matheson, and Charles G. Waugh.
Richard Matheson.
Yep.
Richard Matheson wrote several episodes for The Twilight Zone.
And he also did some short stories.
Especially later on, because by the fifth season, Rod Serling only wrote 6 of the episodes himself, and that was the final season.
Josh, I am not insane.
Okay, we're going to be going over One for the Angels, which was adapted into a short story by Rod Serling's daughter, Anne Serling-Sutton. Rod Serling wrote this particular episode. He wrote he wrote the teleplay. It aired on October 9th, 1959, and Lou Bookman was played by Ed Wynn, who was a very prominent figure. He was a talk show, he had a talk or variety show back then, and he had a very, very animated, kind of like a Trevor, Ari, Charlie kind of personality.
Animated's the word. Sometimes he was actually appeared in animation, like he was the Mad Hatter in the Disney version of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, the 1951 version?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And it's he was also when describing Mayor McCheese from the Ronald McDonald cartoons, they based his voice off of Ed Wynn.
Talk about influence.
A very modern day equivalent of that is Ed Wynn. If you know about Bradley Walsh, right, Trevor? The guy who plays Graham in Doctor Who.
Oh! Him.
Yeah, they're very similar because Bradley Walsh has that very outstanding personality, but just like Ed Wynn in this story, like Bradley Walsh is he's much more toned down, but he's still got that bubbly, outgoing personality that kind of makes him right for the role.
That whatever works, and Doctor Who is such a franchise.
Yeah.
You have a discussion starter for One for the Angels?
So I do have an interesting question to ask all of you, and that is about the character of Death. We know the character of Death pops up in the story because I mean, I should just briefly explain the plot because we're good on spoilers, right? So the plot.
It's a discussion.
Yeah. So the plot is basically that Edwin's character, Lou Bookman, and he is like a pitch salesman. He sets up pitches and he tries to sell things and show people, like kids and stuff, different items. And then one day Death comes and says, "You gotta die." And then he says, "No, I don't want to." And instead of taking him, Death decides to take a little girl who lives nearby. And like basically what happens is that you have Lou is praying to Death. He's like, "Please don't take away this girl. Take me instead." He's like, "Nope, I can't do it. Sorry. I have to be on time at this appointment at this time to take the girl away." And then suddenly Lou sets up this pitch that was just supposed to be like a tiny pitch of no relevance to show Death, but then he gets Death so interested and so like involved in it that Death misses his appointment. So he does instead take Lou because he has to take someone at that time. And in turn
he sells himself.
Yeah, basically.
He was making Death sweat.
So my question would be, we've seen Death, like, what's the word? He's been personified, yes, in different ways throughout different kinds of mediums and just different. But I personally felt that Death in this story was was different. And my question to you is, what did you think of the personification of death in this story, and how it differs from other stories you've seen before?
As in stories featuring death, or Twilight Zone stories?
Any stories featuring death.
To me, my first impression of Death is that he reminded me of some college instructors that I've had, just by personality, not by the fact that they were looking to off college students.
I sure hope not.
No, that would not be good.
That would be your generational problem
But
right there.
as far as, I think that Death was he was very serious. He was very straight-minded. It wasn't like anything was going to get into his way. But most importantly, he looked, stereotypically speaking, normal in how it wasn't.
I think it was actually mentioned in the book that he was just like a normal guy.
Mm-hmm.
And only Lou could see him. I mean, during the times when
Yeah,
Only
only
if you
people-
were scheduled to make that journey with death can you see him.
Yeah, the girl couldn't see him when she was perfectly alive, but she started to see him when she got hit by the car. But
he was like, "Mommy, who's that man over there?" Like I think that's what it was.
And it was very interesting. I remember the part where Lou Bookman is walking down the stairs, and he's at each. If you're going down one set of stairs, and then sometimes you turn and go down another set, he was at the bottom of the first set, the second set.
I think that's usually called a loft.
A loft, yeah. He was at the bottom of the.
Because Lou thought he can escape him by just running, just plain old running away from him.
And I think that was always a silly thing where he said, I'm not going to make another pitch. He shouldn't have. It would be in his better interest not to tell him, and instead,
yeah. I think he was just running because it was like when you're faced with death. I mean, a lot of people that's their first reaction,
especially if you feel that nothing's wrong with you. And Lou was 69.
I mean, obviously he wasn't healthy, but he didn't feel like there was anything wrong.
Yeah,
and he had the love of all those kids that would come and hang out with him and ask him about his day and what he sold that day. And I mean, he had all this trust, and all of a sudden this death thing comes along and kind of spoils his whole routine.
But the way the pitch is written, the final pitch, how that is written, I don't know if it was Rod or if it was Ann who actually wrote that. Probably Rod, but
probably
it was written so well. And if that, no wonder when you see the actual episode, it's done so well. Like they knew exactly what they wanted. They got the exact items they wanted. But when you read it, like it's like it's like a shining light in this entire situation. And it makes it different from a lot of other Twilight Zone stories, because usually Twilight Zone stories like to have twists or something that like at the end of the story, not in the middle. And they're always like, something that's a little bit science-y or fantasy, and I guess death is kind of like that. But in this one, it's just someone else is in danger, and you are going to do the most outrageous thing to make sure that they're okay, even if it means at the cost of your own life. And it's just that pitch is just, it's a bright shining light in a dark room.
Because he starts out by pitching an item like a tie, but then he goes on to pitching himself, where which by that time he makes death late.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that pitch could be a real curveball.
No. I knew you were going to say that. No.
Well, you know what? I like to add something to that. You wonder when you think about that at the looking at the whole story and the fact that Lou did his phenomenal speech. He got what he wanted, and then he voluntarily went with death, and they all parted their ways. But do you think it's possible that Death had this whole thing in mind? The whole scenario, the way it laid out, like he knew it was going to work like that because he wanted him to make this grandiose speech before he had to go. So you wonder if Death kind of had a soft spot for Lou and made him do that to get to that point.
Depends on your perception of Death.
I'm not so sure, simply because he was pretty insistent that Lou went with him initially, and it was only when Lou was absolutely stubborn and ridiculous about it, that he took him. I mean, it's an interesting point though.
Mm-hmm. I guess it comes down to perception because death is death is death is death. Where there's no way when the inevitable takes place, there's no way that you can interfere.
Makes the Reaper sound like a bureaucrat.
Which is what makes it Twilight Zone.
But yeah, absolutely. But yeah, the Twilight Zone it's the fifth dimension. It turns everything onto its head.
But I just think the way they approached this story was different than a lot of, like, this is not to serve man. This is not I shot an arrow into the air.
This is not a big tall wish.
Yeah, this is a story, and this is, keep in mind, I don't know if this was written first, but this was like the second episode to ever air. I think
Yes.
Where Is Everyone was the first one. And
That was the pilot. This is the first one to air. I do not think that this was the second one to be written.
I don't remember.
Because I have a book where...
Well, we said it was an adaptation,
Yeah.
so it was probably done later, but...
Because technically the last one to be filmed was An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, but yet it was not the last one to air.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the book and the episode were exactly the same, word for word.
You mean One for the Angels?
They were
Yeah.
very
Most
similar.
of them are. I would say... that was... Speaking of which, what were your thoughts about the short story compared to the episode?
I like the story better. I feel like, I mean, Edwin's great, obviously, but I think just like, as Karl said, they're very similar, but when I used to read a short story, like in the actual film, you see what is presented on the screen, but even though it said, oh, you know, the person who plays Death is clearly another human being, like, when I read it, I don't see that. Like, the way my brain kind of personifies Death in this situation is, like, just, like, a really fuzzy, blurry guy. Like, a guy who's completely blurry, maybe dark purple in color, like a ghost, kind of. But he's there. Like, he's there, and only Lou Bookman can see him. And Lou Bookman, I imagine him when I'm not looking, again, not talking about, I imagine I have glasses and maybe have, like he's like, hey, everybody, I'm Lou Bookman, you know, that kind of stuff.
I think I cannot help but think of the Twilight Zone episode when I read.
I read this before I saw the episode. That's partially why.
Yeah, mine is flipped, and I think that out of the adaptations that I've read, this is just about as accurate as you can get.
This one was beautiful, and I think I actually do prefer the short story though.
Well, plus with the short story too, you're limited on space, so you can't drone on. You have to pack all that information that you want to say your story, but you have to keep it short, keep it a short story. So I think it's more challenging for the author, don't you think? That like to kind of pack all that into one setting.
Depends though, because you have, when it comes to short stories, unless you have a word count limit or a page count limit, when it comes to an episode, you have to keep it within half an hour. In this case, with this,
Actually, less than a half an hour because you've got these ads too.
22
ads,
minutes or something.
and they still had ads there too. Yeah, so I would say 22 minutes, maybe a little bit more. But I mean, compare this to Night of the Meek. I thought that Night of the Meek, the episode was much better than the story. I mean, it was different where Rod Serling tried to make it more
Anything with Art
Carney.
Anything with Art Carney is good. Anything with John Fiedler isn't it good? I mean, just some of these actors, like, they make the episodes, but when you don't have actors, when you're just reading it off the page, like, a lot of times, like this one was just wonderful. It really was. And I'm not. Again, the episode was great too. I just think, like, really, you can't. I like the short story a little better because it's just quicker and easier to read for me. But overall, I think just it's a wonderful story in general, whether you're watching it or you're reading it.
What about you, Trevor? What do you think?
I think each one has its own merits, depending on what you like better. Or personally, I just think take each one its own different right.
I would see in this case, I am completely in line with you, where in most cases the book or the written work is clearly better than the film or the adapted version. But when you think of even with something like To Serve Man, the Damon Knight short story and the episode are just two different products.
I actually don't like the episode version as much as the short story for that particular one.
I think the short story cuts it off, but I think both of them boggle your mind in their own way.
That's what's great about Twilight Zone.
Which we were talking about Soylent Green. There's no graphic images. It's just what is taking place in your head.
Yeah, what you're forming in your mind.
Yes, and what you would imagine is going to happen as opposed to...
Now, we have done an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, and I think that was on Twilight Zone, but it was adapted or something, wasn't it?
That was an Ambrose Bierce short story. He was basing it off of... No, wait. That particular film was a short film in the Cannes Film Festival. It was a French film. And Rod Serling was able to pick it up to show on his show. Because it was an ultimate... He was able to work it in as an ultimate speculative short story. I remember we went over that in a short...
4.
We went over it in season 4, and then we discussed it in a short story class that I took, and I couldn't help but mention that they went over it in the Twilight Zone.
So this was one for the Angels. There are also a couple other good stories as well in this book that Josh has. One of them I don't even think is an episode. It's called Disappearing Act. I don't know if that was ever made into an episode. This one. There's also The Howling Man. It's a Good Life. Third from the Sun's a good one. Obviously, Time Enough at Last. That's like the classic one. And then if you go to the next page, you've got...
I Sing the Body Electric was Ray
That's
Bradbury's.
good. I know Mute's pretty good. Mute is actually an hour-long story if you watch it.
Season 4.
Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
Yeah,
was
that's what I was quoting earlier. And then, of course, there's Long Distance Call and then Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. So lots of good Twilight Zone stories written down, put into written work for you guys to enjoy in this book.
Third from the Sun was when the world started.
When it was really, 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 really
It was
hot,
getting
but it was
hot.
actually cold. That was the twist.
Yeah, I remember that one. I just remember the thermometer breaking and squirting up.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a cool effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially for that time. It was the early 60s.
You know, and I read the book first. Sorry, I read the book first, and then I watched the episode, and I was happy that I saw the episode because in my mind I pictured the scene, the city scene. I kind of pictured that as the same, but I liked the guy who played Death. I forgot his name, that actor's name, but he was the mayor in the movie Jaws. Remember they were on the he had the coat with
It's sometimes said
he had like little sharks or something, or little like whales or something, or anchors. It was something that was
okay.
some kind of nautical theme. But that was him. That was the same guy. He was a pretty handsome dude in the Twilight Zone, but he played like just like a no nonsense kind of organized. Like he could have been a businessman of some sort, but.
I can
Wouldn't
look
be
it up
the least
who it
bit
is afterwards.
surprised to learn that particular Mr. Death ever actually had interactions with the IRS. The two big inevitables actually having lunch together and just going on their separate ways afterward. Death and taxes.
Oh, lovely.
Matter of fact, there was an issue of the Twilight Zone magazine sometime in the 80s when they actually did a story like that, where there's this guy who's running from the man in black, and he's like, but finally, he's eventually cornered, and this man in black is walking up with his briefcase. "Are you Death?" says the protagonist. The man in black flashes his briefcase and says, "No, I'm the other one." End of
That's interesting.
That's pretty much an end to
A
that.
Twilight Zone magazine in general, though, would be something I'd have to zero in on, even though... Isn't it? It's out of print now?
Out of print, sadly, and I've yet to find out where you can actually find decent copies of various archive editions.
Shame. One day, maybe it'll pop up at the book garden one day.
Hope springs eternal,
Do we have
even
any...
in the Twilight Zone.
Yes, indeed. Do we have any final thoughts?
I like the story. I really do.
I like it, too.
Same here.
I think that
Absolutely.
Rod Serling did a great job with I consider him the Shakespeare of speculative fiction. When you have Bradbury and Matheson.
May I mention one episode that I think everyone should watch real quick.
What's that?
This episode is called Death's Head Revisited. Have you heard of it?
What's the concept?
The concept is there is an SS officer who goes back to Dachau, and he goes to the concentration camp in Dachau, and there's a guy there who is from back from the. This is like 20 years after the war, 30 years after the war, and there's a guy there who was like one of the Jews that used to be there, and they basically him and these ghosts of people to give him a trial. And he basically becomes completely the SS officer becomes completely insane. You've never heard of this one?
It was a half-hour one.
It was a 22-minute one, yeah.
Okay.
It is one
I'll
of
have
the.
to look.
It's one of the. It's like you talked about ahead of its time before. This was ahead
I'll
of
have
its
to
time.
look into that one because
It's called Death's Head Revisited.
If it pertains to, because this was the '60s, if it pertained to the Nazi Germany and the concentration camps, that was 20 years later, but still.
It was very much recent in the minds of people, and it was an
Yes.
important. I think if you have not seen that, Josh, I think that's an episode you should check out. I think it's season 3.
I'm making my way through I have the complete Twilight Zone series, and I gotta make my way through it.
Isn't that what that is?
This is about
Oh, I think he's talking about the DVD series.
DVDs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Because mine's soft cover, the one that I got.
But this particular one for the Angels, one of the first, but also one of the best. It's up there with Time Enough at Last.
Yeah, this is everything that was. This was everything that was published, save for The Chaser by John Collier. And here is a copy if you're interested in checking it out.
They also have it. I don't know if it's out of print or not, but they also have it in paperback.
Alrighty, be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
reading.